Hello and welcome to another edition of Conversations of the Heart, Season 6. Of course, as always, it is your boy T-Tail. We have a very special guest again here. I like to call her, my resident therapist here of the Conversations of the Heart
Awesome.
podcast here. We have Jane Johnson Wall. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's practicing in Colorado, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Florida. She is a person that has a wealth of knowledge. She's taught me a great deal just by having conversation. She has dropped so many different gems throughout our conversations on the podcast and taught so many different people about perinatal, maternal, mental health, and perinatal loss and birth trauma. I mean, the wealth of knowledge is endless here for Jane here, and I just want to welcome you back and say thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time and your expertise in
Oh,
advance. Um,
thanks
so
for
for
having me.
of course, so before we get into the topic, if you want, for the people who don't know you or who missed the show or who are new to Conversations of the Heart, please give a little intro about yourself.
Will. And just to update you, T, I am now licensed in 6 states: California, Florida, Georgia just got added.
Yeah, okay.
Massachusetts, New Hampshire got added, and Rhode Island. So, but now I'm done. No, no more. That's it. I'm maxed out. Um, as you referenced, I am a marriage and family therapist specializing in working with women, but also specifically within the facet of all things motherhood. So I love what I do. And in part, I love working with moms because I love being a mom. And
Mm,
I've got big kids. My kids are 23 and 22. My younger one's graduating from college. My older one just decided on law school. Like, there's a lot that happens even when our kids are big, but the parenting challenges that come into play when kids are young are just the
hmm
building blocks to deal with the bigger things.
mm,
And so overall, I live a pretty quiet life, and
hmm
I feel very lucky to love what I do.
I love that. And at the, and of course, we're definitely, if you didn't get a chance to check out last season, Jane was on last season, just talking about, the Mother Lode Collective, your mom pod. I mean, there's just so many different things. And of course, those links, of course, again, will be in, the bottom right up here for you to click and check everything out so you can see what Jane is doing because she's doing some amazing work in this field.
Thank
Um,
you.
Today, we're talking about a very important subject. With this episode, we're creating awareness around epilepsy, right? What is neurodivergence, right? And so, you know, Jane has been gracious enough to want to share her experience, with epilepsy, and bring more awareness to this particular topic, which is what we do here at Conversations of the Heart. So let's dive right on in. So before we get into your experience here, what is, for the people who don't know, what is epilepsy?
I mean, I think it's hard to just, kind of sum it up. I mean, it's the
Hmm
fourth most common neurological condition. So,
mm
it's a common one. In essence, the brain waves, they just don't have the flow and consistency that they're meant to have. There's disruption. And so, our brain is kind of the central processing place for our entire body.
hmm
And so when your brain is not communicating in the way that it needs to communicate, it really can make life difficult.
Right. And is epilepsy for life or is there a cure? What?
So it's interesting. There are experiences in situations where people will have epilepsy that is caused by something, right? A febrile seizure, right? Having a fever, a head injury. There are things that can cause epilepsy, but in general, it's idiopathic. There can also be an injury that can cause an ongoing seizure disorder. But for many people, it's idiopathic. You're just kind of born with a brain that has this tendency. And then
Mm,
there can be an ebb and a flow even into what that process looks like.
right. Okay. And how did you find out? Like
I found out the
when
hard way.
oh boy. Uh-oh. All right. So how did you find out?
Um, well, I mean, ultimately, right, to get a diagnosis, you have
Right.
an evaluation with a neurologist. You will often have like brain scans, CAT scans, MRIs, and then you'll have an EEG, which just measures your brain waves.
Yes.
And so ultimately, that's how I was diagnosed via my
Mm,
EEG, but also the history of what happened when, in fact, I had a seizure. And so then it was kind of working backwards because nobody knew what in fact had happened to me because I was by myself.
mm,
But then piecing together my experience and what I was able to share, and then taking the EEG into consideration. And I saw my EEG. I don't know how to read an EEG, but I saw it, and I realized that something was horribly wrong. And so I remember saying to the neurologist that that was a picture of my internal experience of my brain. I said, "You captured a picture of what happens in my head." And so it just kind of went from there.
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty traumatic. And I don't know too much about epilepsy, but I know some people who have had chronic seizures and stuff like that. And it's very, very
Yeah.
scary, for
Hmm.
various different reasons. And so, you know, excuse me. So when it comes to getting that diagnosis, right? Immediately I could imagine it's like, uh-oh, okay, what's next? Right? Like what happens next? Um, and what can you do, right, to
Hmm.
get better?
Yeah.
So once you got that diagnosis, what was the next step from there?
Well, right, if we look at like say the stages of grief, I was straddling depression and just like I just was in disbelief. Like I truly thought that somehow something was wrong, right? That with
Mm-hmm.
the test, right? That somehow it couldn't have been accurate. Um it was really, really difficult for me. And just for context, for me, it had been a few months since I had had my episode where I quote unquote passed out and I hit my head. It turned out that I had knocked myself unconscious. Like we kind of worked backwards from that information.
Well,
And so it just like I had had a few months of they were figuring out was it something cardiac and things like that, right? Like a little exploration.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I was kind of feeling better. I ended up with a horrible concussion. I had a lot of complications from that. So I was just feeling like I was kind of getting things figured out. And then this new piece of information came into play. Like I almost didn't go for my EEG because I was like, I'm feeling better. It doesn't make sense for me to do this. I'm glad I went and did it in
Mm,
hindsight. But yeah, getting that news, it just kind of rocked my world, right? As somebody who is self-employed, as somebody who runs, a business, somebody who has a new partnership, with another LLC, like it was a lot for me to try to wrap my head around in
mm-hmm.
very real time. Um, in essence, for me, it's almost like everything that I had ever known about myself came into question. Like I doubted
Mm,
everything that I had ever experienced because I was
mm,
like, is that how I really experienced it? Or is that how I experienced it as a result of epilepsy?
right.
Um, yeah, so it really kind of threw me, I won't say into a tailspin, but into a deep dive
Absolutely.
of really trying to figure out how my brain worked.
Well, and I assume what comes with that is lifestyle change. I think I read that there are things that people with epilepsy can't do or shouldn't do
Mhm.
um, anymore, right? If there were, let's just say, if they did rock climbing, skydiving, bungee jumping, right? Well, which all things I'm not doing, but
Yeah,
nevertheless, with or without,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But there are a lot of people who do, right? Swimming alone, right? Or just things that people take for granted, going scuba diving, things, just all of those things, right? I've read it's like that has to be halted or paused for a little
For
bit.
me, it's skiing. Yeah. So
Ooh.
yeah. So, I mean, looking at the timing, say 3 weeks maybe before I had my seizure, I was driving 2.5 hours to a local mountain, skiing for half a day, and then driving home. And
Wow.
skiing by myself, I mean, I've skied for a long ass time. Like it's not, and I wasn't doing anything. I wear a helmet. I wasn't doing anything particularly challenging. I stayed on well-marked trails and the whole thing just because I
Mm-hmm.
realized I was skiing alone, and so that made sense. But it's the sort of thing that I was like, I'll never ski alone again. I would
Mm,
never do that idea of driving, right? Like a round trip of 5 or 6 hours and then skiing for 5 hours. Like I just, that, it was a little reckless probably as a middle-aged mom to do anyway, but certainly now, like I wouldn't even think of it. Um,
mm-hmm.
and so like things like that, I think were just like that was the big one. You are absolutely right. Things like swimming come into play. I've read about bike riding being something that, right? Like, it's something I like I'm pretty petite, right? Like I'm 5'2". Um, and I have an appreciation for how heavy a body is when it lets go and you go
Mm-hmm.
down, like it's pretty wild.
Mm,
So I can see where things like riding a bike, if your seizures are not controlled,
mm,
that's a very vulnerable place to be.
mm. And I can imagine, like if these are the things that you people love to do, right? It de-stresses them. That's who they've been for years, and they love it.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
that comes along with, I would say, a lot of disappointment, because well, how do I de-stress now, right? How do I, you know, do the things that I want to do for enjoyment now, right? Or even
Yeah.
just little things. Like you said, driving 5 or 6 hours. I know people who love to drive, and it's just like,
Yeah.
and they rather drive than fly, right? And it's
Yeah.
like those long road trips. Well, I can't do those anymore, or at least by
Mhm.
myself, right?
Right. Right.
Um, so a lot of those things now come with life adjustments. And okay, so what do I do at this point? And
Hmm.
I think that's something to think of as well, because sometimes it's like, oh, you know what? Well, you just switch it up. But a lot of times you may not want to switch it up, or you may not feel like, oh, like, because now it's like, well, I like going skiing. I don't want to
Yeah.
go. I don't want to just, do something else, right? That I may not enjoy, right? And
Well, it's hard to be forced into it, right? Like it's one
right,
thing to be like, oh, this and I enjoy whatever activity, but I've always been intrigued about trying another one, right? Like it's
right,
different when we have the autonomy. When
right.
something is forced, where it's like the thing that you enjoy is taken away, and now it's on you to figure out what new thing would come in, could be helpful. There's part of me that's like that new thing in some ways doesn't stand much of a chance because if you're still mourning the loss of the
I was just
preferred
about to say
activity,
that.
you're
Hmm.
not really in a great place to embrace it.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, I found my thing.
What's the thing?
My thing became yoga. My thing
Aha.
became yoga. I always dabbled with some yoga. Um, but that kind of became my thing in part because I had a time period where I couldn't drive. And so
Mm-hmm.
for many people with epilepsy, they can't drive.
Mm.
Um, and so I had a time period where I couldn't drive. I was adjusting to medication. And so I had friends who were going to yoga. And so they picked me up and took me to yoga. And so I just kind of was forced into expanding a bit. I went to new
Mm-hmm.
beaches during the summer, in part because I couldn't drive myself to the beach. And so I went with other people. Um, and so you need to be in a place though to do that mental gymnastics
Mm.
and try something new. And I recognize that for me, my kids were home from school, so I had the support that I needed in that regard. That's something that comes up for people who have epilepsy, the idea of the loss of autonomy in so many ways, where you feel like you do have, caregivers or you're reliant on people to help you with things. And that
Mm.
that can take a real toll on somebody's mental health and emotional well-being.
Mm. And do you think yoga has done something to like relax you or to or help you physically, right? throughout this stressful period
Absolutely.
in time.
My resistance to yoga was always one of it's too slow. I just,
That
and
is
so,
true.
and here we go. You and I had chatted about this earlier, right? Like the life
Mm,
lesson comes your way.
mm-hmm.
And so that was the life lesson for me, that it was like, yep, it might be too slow, but in many ways, it's the only pace that you have. And so I
Mm,
feel like it has brought me a whole new appreciation for the mind body connection.
mm,
It has really helped me embrace that process of slowing my brain down, right? That, that's what it's designed to do, and designed to be the opportunity for me. And
mm,
so I mostly do just meditative kind of mindfulness
mm.
classes, and it's pretty fantastic.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I think people underestimate the like when you say, I couldn't drive, right, for
Mm.
a while, right? Some people say, oh, well, it's great, like, you just got just chauffeured around. But I think a lot of people don't realize that when you get to a certain point in life, it's like you don't want to lose your independence. And that is another grief point,
Absolutely.
right? It's
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want some, I want to just get up and go. I don't want to have to depend on anyone else, right? Like I'm used to
Yeah.
going to the supermarket. I'm used to just going to my little errands or whatever the case is, and just moving and shaking just how you like to do, right? And
Oh, right. It's that autonomy to pick and
mm-hmm,
choose. I say to people, and I've said this, pre-diagnosis, just the idea that my car can sit in the driveway all day and it doesn't even faze me, right? Like not a problem. But if my car is getting an oil change or whatever, suddenly I'm like, this is the moment when I have to go to CVS. Like I can't believe that my car isn't here. I need to go to
mm-hmm,
CVS. Like it's just when we don't have the freedom to do the things that we want and need to do, it really does become this mental sort of barrier as well. That it's like that idea of the freedom for people who've been driving for years. So
mm-hmm.
for young adults who aren't able to get their licenses because of their epilepsy and their seizures,
Ooh,
right? Like think
mm,
about through that perspective of being a teenager and being in a place where you're finally stepping in theoretically, but
yes,
stepping into a newfound level of freedom, and to not
wow.
have that available to you. What a frustrating place to be in your
Mm.
development. Yeah.
That's really true because,
Mhm.
focusing on more so of, if you're getting it older, you've already started it and it's kind of taken away. But then if you're younger and you can track this, then it's like, all of your friends are getting cars, driving, work,
Mhm.
going out on dates,
Yeah, doing
going to
all the things
movies,
that
all the
teenagers
things.
do.
And then it's
Yeah.
like you can't.
Mhm.
That is traumatic in and of itself.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
My goodness. Go ahead. You want to say something?
No, I
Yeah, go
was
ahead.
going to say, like, I work remotely, right? So that wasn't a problem. But the idea of if I needed to get a ride to work every day,
Ooh,
right? Like that would have been a difficult piece.
Uber, expensive.
Hmm.
Um,
Expensive.
wow.
Yeah.
That that is a lot to take in and to think about because it's always like those little things, I think, in life that you realize they add up to be the big things, right? And
Mhm.
I think it's those little points of grief. It's they add up, right? And it costs a
Absolutely.
lot, right? It's like, oh, it's only 50 cents. Oh, no, 50 cents over here, here. And it's up here. It's like, man, like I'm grieving a lot. And you're like, well, why? And you ever realize sometimes, like when you're grieving just about random things, it's like, well, nothing really big is happening in my world. Like, why do I feel like this? But it's like it's those little points
Those
of
little
grief,
things.
little things that
Absolutely.
add up that seem to be happening simultaneously at once. And you're just like, oh, and these are the
Yeah.
things, those little small details that are huge things in life.
Well, and those small details that also they have an ebb and a flow to them, right? If
Yes.
they were predictable, if the small details were just the small things and they would just stay in their place and we knew
Yep.
what they were, we'd work around them.
Mm-hmm.
but there is an ebb, there is a flow,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like, on a good day, you can navigate through all of them. You're having a rough day for whatever reason, unrelated to anything, specifically connected to grief, and those things just feel unsurmountable.
Absolutely. Wow. So when it comes to neurodivergence,
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about that. Like, like, I
Um,
mean, for the people who don't know, people are like, neuro what? Dive. Yes,
well,
neurodivergence.
neurodivergence. I mean, neurological stuff is kind of like, this comes up with autoimmune disease, right? That if people have one, they typically have more than one. And so when we look at things neurological, I have like the trifecta. So I have migraines, I have epilepsy, and I have ADHD.
Mm.
And so it's kind of like it's a party in my head, right? Like there's just always something bouncing around in my brain. Part of my charm, potentially. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. But just being able to look at it through that lens of ADHD, autism, right? That realm of, neurodivergence, those things that help now people be able to understand that their way of navigating the world is
Mm.
not necessarily the world's way that it would
Mm-hmm.
want you to navigate.
Mm.
And so, there are so many people who have diagnosed ADHD, but also so many people who are not diagnosed. I work with women, predominantly mothers, but I work with women, and many of them are being diagnosed with ADHD
Mm.
after motherhood. And so we kind of talk about what happens that
Mm.
if we look at it through, and this is going to be kind of a broad, gender focus, but
Yep.
little boys are more prone to being diagnosed with ADHD simply because their symptoms are problematic for people directly.
Mm.
They're bouncing out of their seats. They're, whatever, shoving their friends. They're, playful, but, they're doing whatever sorts of things. So, very, I fully acknowledge I'm being very, gender stereotype here. But so boys are more apt to be diagnosed and treated. Girls have a tendency to be more quiet and inward. So they may be chatty, certainly, but not necessarily disruptive or dangerous to other people.
Mm.
They may be a little spacey and right, like not necessarily focused, but again, it's typically not disruptive. So you've got just starting from early stages, you often have a lot of missed opportunities for girls who then go on to become young women. And one of the strengths of ADHD for across genders is that we know that people are very intelligent and they're very creative and resourceful in figuring out the systems that work for them.
Mm.
And so for women who navigate through, even often getting advanced degrees, they're able to navigate through, but then when they become mothers and they are no longer just responsible for themselves and the executive functioning skills that are required to get them through what they need to do, they now
Mm-hmm.
need to take in a whole new consideration. It kind of like it overblows the, overwhelms the system, and it's all like kind of blown out of proportion, right? That
Mm-hmm.
the techniques that they were able to use in managing are now not as readily usable. And so this is coming up where I've got more and more women who are being diagnosed in adulthood.
Wow. Wow.
And there's grief there too, through
Mm-hmm.
the lens of women recognize I struggled much more than I needed to. Right. And this is
Yep.
common with neurodivergence that people have, they struggle with their sense of self and in their identity. They feel like I'm different, right? I can't do the things that other people can do. Therefore,
Mm.
it's something that is less than about me, right? It's a character flaw. And so even once people are diagnosed and, they find treatment, whatever that may look like, some people say I've lived my whole life without medication. So I don't feel like I need to implement that now, but I want to
Right.
know what other supports are available.
Mm-hmm.
But grief often comes into play as part of it because
Mm.
people realize I worked harder. I struggled in ways that conceivably I didn't need to. And that was part of
Mm,
my experience with all of this as well, just realizing how hard my brain had to work to
mm,
achieve the things that it achieves. And which I think, my brain does some pretty cool stuff, but I realized that it takes a bit more out of me. And there are statistics that reference for people who have neurodivergence, how much harder their brains have to work
mm.
for the same results.
Wow. And, for some stats, they said children between 5 to 17 years old, there's 11.3% have been diagnosed with ADHD, and 6% for 18 and over.
Mhm.
So, that's approximately 15.5 million adults.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Wow.
And they said like the highest diagnosis rate it was observed between the ages of 18 to 24.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow.
Do you have
And
theories? Do you have theories as to why 18 to 24 might be a hot spot?
I don't know. I mean,
I
that's a,
like I'm asking like it just that's what
yeah.
bubbled up for me, right? As I was like, I
Hmm.
wonder why 18 to 24.
Me too. I mean that's pretty high. It says 21.7%. And then it says 78% of children with ADHD also has at least one other diagnosed disorder,
Oh yeah.
which is
Yeah.
what you were
But
saying.
when your brain is neurospicy, your brain is
Hmm.
neurospicy. It just it kind
Neuro spicy. I love it.
um I my theory, for whatever it's worth, with the 18 to 24-year olds is that that's when they are launched into freedom, right? So we can think of kids with ADHD struggling in school, but there are
Hmm.
confines around it, right? So we've
Hmm.
kind of they may struggle, but there are adults that at least theoretically are there kind of helping keep them on track. I
Hmm.
feel like that 18 to 24 is potentially if you are going off to college, you have a newfound freedom. There's not the same element of oversight. But I was also thinking as you launch into all things work, right? Like
That's true.
now you're working. Like that's, and not that anybody's holding anybody's hands, but you're not in the same kind of environment, the safety net of a
Hmm.
school environment. Now, like in school, certainly the expectation is the expectation, but people are in general wanting to support you in meeting that expectation.
Hmm.
At work, if you can't meet the expectation, we'll hire somebody else who can. And so I just wonder if that's some of where that pops up.
I mean, that's good right there. Because I definitely did. No, I didn't think about that to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um, and those are 18 to 24 are very important years too.
Mm.
Um, career,
Well, your
um,
brain is still developing.
relationally,
Yeah.
right? And you're thinking about a lot more things, right? You're starting to feel the pressures of a lot of different things, especially when you hit, 23, 24. When you're excited, but it's
Mhm.
like, oh, like you sort of think, oh, I'm gonna be late 20s, early 30s soon. What does that look like, right? And it's like
Mhm.
things are just going on, right?
Yeah.
Things to think about. Wow. So when it comes to neurodivergence, epilepsy, right? In your one personal experience, if someone it gets a diagnosis, we'll start with epilepsy. What would you say, like, or where do you think that they should start in terms of mental health?
Mm. I mean, I think getting support is so important and getting
Mm-hmm.
support from all of the directions. You need to feel good about your care team, right? You need to feel good
Mm-hmm.
about the doctors. And I was so lucky to already have a neurologist.
Mm.
And I have an amazing therapist. It was actually my therapist who said, Jeannie, you need to call your neurologist, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like told her what had happened, and she was like, you need to call. And I was like, I kind of minimized it. Um, So you need to feel good about the people who are going to help guide the what next sort of thing. Um, it's also important for you to feel like you can advocate for yourself within that confines that these are not the people who know better than you know from
Mm,
your lived experience.
mm-hmm,
I think finding a therapist, but you and I would talk about this endlessly. I think finding a therapist who
mm-hmm,
understands those those nuances of what is involved with a chronic health condition is really
mm-hmm,
important. And I think you want to find friends and family and be vulnerable and have people who can support you in that way, but
mm,
you also want to reach out to the communities, right? Like, you know, the Epilepsy Foundation has communities where people can now, again, with all
mm,
things technology, can access support groups and things like that. I think being able to feel a sense of community is going to be an important piece for anybody, because it can feel very isolating.
mm. Isolating and very scary too.
Mm.
The
Mhm.
fear of the unknown,
Oh, absolutely. It's weird when you can't trust your own body, right? Like you can't trust your brain, you can't trust your body. Like that just takes time to build up, you know, or rebuild a pattern where you're like, okay, yes, right? Like I can trust my brain and I can, you know, trust my body.
Mm.
I
And
just hit 1 year and I had a party. I called it my upright and conscious party.
and congratulations.
Thank you.
I support you 2000%. And it's important to know that, in the US, there's approximately 3 million adults that have active
One
epilepsy.
one in 26 people.
Mm,
So you think about the idea of how many clusters of just say 100, right? Like, you know, to make it easy. But to recognize that in give or take a group of 104 people, you've got four people who have
hmm.
epilepsy.
Right. And they
Yeah.
said worldwide, 50 million people.
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
lot. Um,
It's a lot.
and so, well, one, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, don't want to put you in the spot. Do you know where people can, well, one, is there a place where people can, donate to awareness or, um, cures or research?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's the Epilepsy Foundation.
Hmm.
And they have different branches. So because I'm in New England, I call the
Of course.
Epilepsy Foundation of New England, but they are regionalized.
Hmm.
Excuse me. And I think being able to have those connections,
Hmm.
it allows you to get more information in real time. And
Hmm.
in part because you want your healthcare team to be people who are also paying attention to what's the new information that's coming out.
Hmm.
Research is always happening, and
Hmm.
so it's important to make sure that the treatment options that are available are things that you know are appropriate for whatever your situation is. I started something called craniosacral therapy, which is I don't even know how to explain it because it's just kind of magical, but
Hmm.
it was helpful with all things concussion recovery.
Hmm.
Um, and also can be helpful with migraines and with epilepsy. And so it's just kind of been a good fit. But it's just truly a physical therapist taking some time to kind of help kind of, I don't know what I say to people, it helps slow things down and it just helps like, things feel more aligned. And there's
Hmm.
a much more detailed piece. I just say to people, it's magical.
And there are support groups. I know the Epilepsy Foundation has a support group, and the
Yeah.
Epilepsy Alliance America, they have support groups that are offered
Mhm.
online and in person. If you
Yeah.
or someone you know and love, need support, there are support groups for you. And of course, aside from therapy, there are also good support groups for that. Um, so having these experiences, I mean, and you know, I think, and I'm trying to put this in the right way, right? So having these experiences at a certain age, right?
Mhm.
Because you look no more than 30,
Oh, you're very kind.
no more than 30, right? You look no more than 30. But I know you have kids, right? And you know, and so having these experiences at a certain age, right? To me, because I've realized when I've spoken to people who are of a certain age, right? And you're not old by any stretch of the imagination, right? But you're not,
Just say it, T.
no, no,
Just say
no,
it. It's
no,
all right.
no,
I
no,
can take it.
no, I'm trying to say, because sometimes it's different when you're 20 and
Yeah,
or you're young and like super young and you just right? But
absolutely.
even me, I'll say my age, I'm 40, right? There's a reflective time in life, like where you start to think about, like, oh wow, like I used to do this, I used to do that, and
Hmm.
it's it's a real thing up here, and right, and you start to look at like the rest of what that looks like, the rest of your life, right, and all of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so like you were blessed to have kids and live an amazing life and successful therapist, right? And helping lots of women in your career, right? And then boom, smack dab, epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how was that for you, right? Like just mentally, right? Because even when I sometimes get out of bed and I tweak my leg and I'm like, I didn't even do anything. What is going on? I start to reminisce about how I could just literally hop from the first step to like fourth, right? And now I look at the step and I'm like, this could be an insurance claim if I do this. Let me just go step by
Yeah.
step, right? You start to reminisce
Yep.
about those things, and
Hmm.
so that's light compared to epilepsy, right? So when you get
Yeah.
this diagnosis, like what is the thing that goes through your mind when you get this diagnosis?
Well, I think I had a couple of things run through my mind, right? Like it never, I was never phased by living alone, right? Like my kids were away at college, like that didn't phase me. And after this happened, I was a little more phased, right? It happened in the middle of the night. So it's like I was a little more phased by the idea of living alone. Like I was kind of like, oh, this is what people talk about. Um, and I think then from there, so oddly enough, my age, which is more than 30, we've clarified, but my age is kind of a variable in this. So they think that the estrogen drop, and this comes into play for many women. I believe
Mm,
they're called catamenial seizures or catamenial epilepsy, where women will have seizures around their periods.
mm-hmm,
And so for me, they are assuming that it was probably an estrogen drop with all things menopause
mm,
that left me more susceptible to this because they see this happen for women. And
mm,
so it just, right. So those things are tied in. Um, I have reconciled that I will take medication for the rest of my life. And then I kind of chuckle and I say, because what's that, right? However many years, right? It's not like that's the least of it for me. And I'm
mm,
very lucky that they found the right medication balance for me early on.
mm,
But I think, for me, it's like this is part of who I am now. And how do I honor that personally and professionally? So it took me some time to really integrate this into my identity. And part of that was I was adjusting to medication, right? Like it was foggy and at
mm,
times and it was tough to do. Um, but over time I just kind of like integrated this idea of this is part of who I am and having more of an appreciation for my brain and how it works. But this is something that I know career wise, this is going to be a subset of something that I focus on. I have autoimmune issues, and I've always, highlighted that. So I've done that same thing with epilepsy.
mm,
So it was a while, but I did ultimately tell clients because I figured that I needed people to know that if I for whatever reason needed to change our time that we're meeting or something like that. I've always felt confident that nothing was going to happen as far as me having a seizure, but I felt like people are very authentic and vulnerable with me, and so I felt like this is part of who I am, and there were a few people that I had to reschedule and things.
mm,
So so I think that has been for me a big part of what does it look like to integrate this into my life.
Mm,
And then, and I know you and I will talk more about this at a later point, but in the realm of any kind of new relationship and new connection, what did
mm-hmm,
that look like for me to, in essence say, hi, my name is Jane and I have epilepsy. So I
mm,
think it is an ongoing process, kind of as we talked about this idea of, those little blips of grief
mm.
that then it's like they fall into the background, but then they come back. Um, this is one of those things that I think overall kind of falls into the background, but then there are times where it's kind of like, oh, there it is. What are
Wow.
the things that you can do and not do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, they talk about the idea of you should use back burners. I mean, see, that's not something I would ever think of, but they tell you should use back burners on the stove. So if you have a seizure, right, like that protects you. Like these are things that,
Oh,
right, yeah, I never would have thought of that.
wow.
Never would have thought of that.
The back burners on the stove they don't
No, but if you have a seizure, then there are not pots on the front for you to
right.
hit,
They're on the
right?
back. Yeah. Which
Yeah,
it's just gonna take you
but
longer to cook because they're a little slower on the back burners, right?
right, right. But these are the things
Wow.
that, right, like you have a different way of connecting with the
So
world.
and it's interesting because now my mind is going in an array of
I love
different
it.
places of
Yeah.
like knives,
Mm,
like scissors.
all of it.
It's just a lot, I'm thinking about all of those things, and I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
what does that look like? Normal, regular things that people take for granted, right? You get an Amazon package. Oh, I'm gonna get a box cutter and just pop it open, right? And it's like, well,
Absolutely.
you don't know, like what, it's just a lot of stuff. I think that can come along with that, right? Of okay, well, how do I prepare for this? Well, how do I prepare for that? Well, what if this? Well, what if
Yeah.
that? Right? But I don't want to hurt
Hmm.
myself even longer, right? And if I'm a new mother or a new parent, right? Holding my child,
Hmm.
what does that look like?
Well, and then let's loop
Ooh.
it in with that sleep deprivation can be it's kind of like a universal seizure trigger. So
Mm.
we look at the new parenthood piece and we look at the hormonal flux, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about hormones as a variable. We look at sleep deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
We look at any kind of stressful event, and even for families with, healthy, happy, most straightforward labor and delivery, everybody's doing well, but it's still a stressful event.
Mm.
Um, yeah, no, these are the things, and how scary that is for new parents because it's like, yep, how do you
Because
navigate that?
because we talked about before postpartum already.
Mm, yeah,
And if you missed that episode, go back and watch it.
go
It's very
back.
informative, Jane. I'm trying to
A
tell you,
great one.
she gave a lot on that one. But if you mix that with epilepsy, uncontrolled, right? I forgot I think they said that it's over 50% of people with seizures have uncontrolled seizures.
they're a good enough person, right? That they view it as a character flaw. And I mean, much of this comes into play with medications that, when women have epilepsy and they are pregnant, you
Mm,
can't come off of your epilepsy medication, right? So
mm,
there is the whole concern, and certainly, right, they have gradings for, and,
mm-hmm.
for medications and all the things, but you don't want to switch somebody's seizure medication, um, if you don't need to. And so just being able to look at it through that lens of much of the scrutiny is established before the baby even arrives. And so theoretically, that should be a good opportunity for women to lean in. Fortunately, because our healthcare system is not set up to truly be proactive, we
Mm.
are very reactive to really have a sense of when something may be, clinically significant or when something may just be Mm.
or one of the best things I've ever done in my life. Where on the first consultation was like 2 hours, and
Yeah.
they're going just through everything. Like
Yeah.
and I was like, this is a different type of care, right? Like they
Right.
go.
It's unfortunate that that stands out as such a
Mhm.
gift because it's like that's really what medicine should be, right? That you should have
Right.
a doctor who wants to know who you are as a person, how you live your life, um, who you are through history of your own behavior, who you are in history as far as genetics and family history. And
Hmm.
it's just it's frustrating
It is, and I
that
think,
we don't have that as the default.
and it does feel like, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it feels like a gift for me, right? Because
Mm, yeah.
then and then it's like if I wanted to, I could see my doctor like whenever I want, within
Yeah.
reason, right? I mean, but
Yeah,
like,
of course.
but if I literally wanted to see her, but to understand why, I had to talk to the doctor. So when the concierge doctors were telling me about their experiences in offices, you say thank you. Because once again, I feel like a student. Feel like a student that just learned so much.